Okie doke, guys. Section C, so the last section of three of the part one of 1917. We're almost at the end of part one. So, I'm going to have a little investigation here into the kind of balance of power between the Soviet, or the Petrograd Soviet of Workers and Soldiers Deputies, as it's also known, and the the provisional government. So the Duma, the leaders from the cadets, etc. And we're going to have a look into, and at the very start here, this important document in the middle here, Order Number 1. This is a copy of Order Number 1, and why it's so integral to understanding this uneasy balance that was constituted at the start of March 1917, well, old calendar March. But so, what was Order Number 1? Well, this was released on the 1st of March. According to Trotsky, he believed the only worthy document of the February Revolution, and he would have his own reasons for saying that. But it consisted of 7 points. So, the first point was that they wanted to elect soldiers' committees in the military unit. So essentially, providing a sort of Soviet, style democracy within military units to vote on various different elements within the army. Second was election of their representatives to the Soviet, so upwards through the system to the big Soviet. So this one's very interesting. So anything political, the soldiers would follow the Soviet, not the Duma, not the provisional government. So again, just showing here that the soldiers are directly tied to the Soviet and not to the Duma. And really important for us to understand this, because it's, that's where the power is constituted. Who controls the military controls, has the say in how things go, because they are the power, they are the force. So, yeah. So number 4, again, subordination of soldiers to the military commission. So they will follow what the Duma says. So if the Duma says to go, that they want to go on an offensive, etc., then the soldiers will follow orders, but only as far as the orders do not deviate from what the Soviet has said. So again, once again, we see how tied up here the Duma leaders were. Number 5, control of weapons by soldiers' committees, very similar. Number 6, military discipline while on... Well, actually, number 5 is important, as we'll see later as well, for the Bolsheviks and their takeover of power. Number 6, military discipline while on duty, but with full civil rights at other times. We're going to have a look at that in the next slide, about why that's so significant. And number 7, and similarly with number 7, abolition of officers' honorary titles and of officers' use of derogatory terms for their men. So why was order number 1 so significant then? So as I already said, it lays down that the power lay inherently with the Soviet and not with the it was no longer the Provisional Committee at this point, my error there, but the Committee of the Duma. So, this is the order which brings the streets to a halt, essentially, that goes out and says to the soldiers what they need, says to people in the streets what they need to do. The members of the Duma couldn't do this. They don't have a link with the soldiers. They don't have a link with the workers. Although this is specifically a soldier's document. It puts the physical weapons of the Petrograd army garrison, so all the different group army battalions that and all the different barracks that are in Petrograd, which are almost all revolutionary, I would imagine. I mean, I don't know the figures, but it puts the weapons, it keeps the weapons in their hands, and so therefore in the hands of the Soviet. They're the ones that can essentially order what to do with these weapons. I mean, more or less, as we will see, the soldiers sometimes act of their own accord, which again is also part of the wider issue here at the moment, of the fact that there is no sort of uniform power which is keeping everything completely in check. And yeah, this order is important from a soldier's point of view, and from the perspective of just, the why this revolution happened. Really, it was representative, as I've put here, of the calls for human dignity and freedom that the February Revolution really embodied. Before this, soldiers were humiliated. It was an incredibly stolid, brutal, quite vicious environment to be in. Any deviation from the rules would result in extremely harsh punishments. Soldiers couldn't receive books on the front line. They couldn't receive newspapers. They couldn't belong to societies. They couldn't eat in restaurants. They couldn't wear normal clothes when they were back from duty. They were sort of, kept as emblems of the army, which was not necessarily something, you would always want to be. The army as an institution can be very, as I've said, can strip people of their identities in various ways. And maybe some people will have a problem with me for saying that. But yeah, and most importantly as well, officers gave them nicknames, treated them terribly, speaking down to them, making them feel like nothing. Also using a formal way of addressing them, which was outlawed. It gave a sense of respect of the relationship between officers and the normal soldiers, and now addressed as citizen or comrade, which also again levels the playing field essentially. So Feige's claims this document is kind of what's responsible for the breakdown of the army, and that's what brings the Bolsheviks to power. Yeah, we won't go into that because maybe we'll come back to that at another point. But I think what he's saying here is, because this is what puts the power in the hands of the soldiers themselves, because the army is already in a really, really difficult situation, and then has this power now to sort of go against the officers, go against orders, etc. Once the army starts to break down, the provisional government loses all credibility, as we see later. And also it's what allows the soldiers to sort of see themselves as more than just soldiers, and more as a sort of integral part of something bigger that the Bolsheviks kind of harness. So yeah, March 2nd we actually get the announcement. Kerensky is there in front of the Tauride Palace as the only kind of one that people know, and we have this we have this really, really strange political, I guess, kind of house of cards, really, this balancing act in which we have, as we know, the power on the left and the people seen as in power on the right, I suppose. And the key idea here is definitely that this government on the right, the Duma leaders, the ex-cadets, the ex-Octobrists, etc., they are literally powerless without the support of the Soviet. If they colour outside of the lines of what the Soviet has demanded, as Mieville said, the Soviet will support them insofar as they follow the Soviet's demands. So it's very, very, nothing like this seen before in history, I don't think, and only in Russia, only in this very, very particular historical mixture do we see this arising. Again, quite amazing that it happened organically. So yeah, as we say, the press. So there's a new Soviet newspaper announced called Izvestia, which means news in Russian. That it's announced. It tells everybody that the provisional government will be following the 8 points that we looked at in the previous section, and the newspaper calls for everybody to support the government as far as it follows the Soviet. So everyone's aware of this. People are a bit confused that the new prime minister is a prince, Georgy Lvov, the man also very prominent in Zemgor during World War One in organising activities. And one soldier shouts, "Well, is this all we've done? We've got rid of a Tsar, and we've got a prince now." So that's not a great start. a bit of a typo there at the bottom. Sorry about that. So yeah, what's the reaction? Well, provisional government. Lenin calls Russia overnight the freest country in the world. Some people believe that he was saying this in a sort of ironic way, or almost kind of sneering, because yes, the demands from the Soviet were incredibly progressive, but Lenin, as a kind of purist, according to his own reading of Marxism, considered the fact that the provisional government was made up of only members of the bourgeoisie, that it still can't be that free because it's in league with a sort of capitalist element. But all the same, we can see here from this quote from a poet from the time, Alexander Blok. He said, "A miracle has happened. Nothing is forbidden, and almost anything might happen." Which I think really encapsulates the sense of wonder and really what an achievement this revolution was, as it was being spontaneous, as it was happening, driven by the people themselves, and especially after the iron grip of autocracy over this nation, for them to be able to experience this sense of freedom, really, really wonderful thing. And again, such a shame, as I keep saying, about how it was kind of snuffed out very early, wasn't really able to develop much beyond this from this point. But so yeah, Feige's claims there was a wartime government. I guess he doesn't claim. He just, it is what it is. They were a wartime government. They claimed that they were ruling, for the national confidence and salvation, and they claim they were above class or party interests. Again, this is maybe a bit of a tenuous thing, as we'll see later. Their responses to the sort of land issue of the peasantry, etc. But yeah, we've got a lot of, we've got Kerensky here, we've got Milyukov, the ex-leader of the cadets, and Rodyanko is the ex-leader of the Octobrists. So, yeah. Kerensky, as I said, was the only socialist and the only well-known minister. Everyone else wasn't really well-known. So that maybe affects the reason why they were going to wait for this constituent assembly, and they didn't just decide to organise one straight away. They weren't very well known. If they're not well known, they can't be popular, really. They reluctantly took up power, as we saw, almost because they felt that they had to. They were obliged to prevent the Soviet from getting there first, even though the Soviet didn't want to, and obviously they didn't want to provoke the people. These masses of people which have actually sort of created the space for them to move into. They weren't voted by the people, so they didn't really have a mandate. Very similar to our current situation here in the UK with Boris Johnson. So they kind of didn't want to rock the boat. Thought it was best to see the country through the war first. Proves to be a really, really fatal error for them. And as Feige's puts it, the idea was to ask the people to wait for their problems to be solved by a parliament which did not yet exist. It's not a great situation, is it, really, for resolving some of these really, really deep-seated issues that Russia had. So, same day, Shulgin and Guchkov, seen here, make the long journey to see the Tsar, who's stopped at, I believe, Tsarskoye Selo, which is just outside of, I pronounced that wrong, I know, but outside to the north of Petrograd. And they come to sort of make this big plea to him to abdicate, to say that this has already happened, and work themselves up. And they apparently, even when they present it to him, they don't realise that the Tsar's already decided to abdicate. Obviously tries to give it to his son. Realises that it's not the right thing to do, considering how sort of sickly his son is. His brother Mikhail refuses. So I guess some of the cadets slightly disappointed there because they may have been able to sort of have a constitutional monarchy if Mikhail would have accepted such a thing, but that's not the case. So power does pass down then into this dual power system again. Whether it actually is dual power is questionable, and yeah. So just finish off with some pictures here of Nicholas. I mean, I really like this image. You can see him kind of looking quite hopeful, looking in amongst his men. He's decided to take over, and here is him by the summer of 1917, under house arrest, looking very pensive. It's a sorry story for him, really, isn't it? But I mean, what was he doomed? Difficult to know. And yeah, so from March, we end up then, and this is the last bit for this part, this section and part, but we have the war on signs. So, this as Vajji says, and as most people agree, this was a revolution that was against the monarchy, and as a result of that, everything to do with the monarchy, all pictures, all paintings, all signs of the monarchy are torn down and attacked, as we can see here in this artist, and as historian Richard Stites has sort of picked up on. And as Trotsky famously said about this, there was no revival of monarchism whatsoever. It was, I think Trotsky said it was vomited up so heavily that it could never return. Well, I guess Putin would have other things to say about that. But quickly, order number 2. It's quite interesting. Maybe not just a bit of side knowledge here. Tries to sort of an attempt to soften the Soviet stance towards the government, and especially with relation to order number 1, realizing how significant order number 1 is for the actual power that the provisional government has. So what this means is that all army regiments will have a commissar who represents the Soviet, looking over the shoulder of the workings of each army regiment, to ensure that what's happening at the front with the soldiers is what the Soviet wants. So again, we can kind of see this dual relationship here. It's quite remarkable. So what was different then between February 1917 and what came before it? So obviously, clearly the monarchy's toppled. That had never happened before. That was unprecedented. The political consciousness of the workers was much more developed, far more organised in 1905, much clearer demands. We've got the pressures of the war here, which bring the soldiers into the revolutionary mix in a way which was crucial, particularly in Petrograd. As historian Daniel Beers says at Royal Holloway, in 1905 you've got two different things. You have the force of argument and the force of arms. In 1905, the force of argument towards the soldiers won. That this constitutional monarchy sham constitutional monarchy, as we know, given the fundamental laws, but in 1917 the force of argument does not win, the force of arms wins in a big way. Another difference, obviously, we have a huge leap forward for socialist power here with the primacy of the Soviet, Petrograd Soviet, and there's a new culture of Russian democracy. So as Vajji mentions, we get this new the new use of the word a democrat in Russian, which comes to sort of identify people as comrades, consciously seeing themselves as part of a proletariat, so based within class definitions. And then we see the emergence of this word bourgeois, which, bourgeoisie. So we get an us-them attitude, which again the Bolsheviks and Lenin very, very smartly and acutely move into that space. What's the same? There might be more things the same. This was all I could think of off the top of my head, but a lot of the peasantry as an organising force in the countryside is the same. There's no other power other than the mir and the, with the, I guess there's the Volost still and the Zemstva, but the peasants with no power over them are still are in charge of their own land, I guess, despite what the laws might say. The bourgeoisie is still in a prominent role, and socialists are still not in power. But yeah, if you could think of any other differences or similarities, then that would be fantastic. But anyway, that's part 1 done. I hope these haven't been too long or onerous, but we've got, that's as much as I can put in for the moment. But any questions, guys, please obviously leave a comment or whatever. But cheers.